Okay, let's unpack this. We're doing a deep dive today into something that, while on the surface, feels almost counterintuitive: the architecture of public support for the arts. Specifically, we're looking at the Dutch arts system.
Which is often held up as a model, isn't it? A system designed to be progressive, genuinely inclusive, and, deeply supportive of artistic practice. On paper, it looks incredible.
Exactly. It has this gold standard reputation. But systems, and this is the thing, no matter how well-intentioned they are at the policy level, they often operate by their own internal logic, especially when money and procedure get involved.
Mhm.
So our mission today is to look past those policy ideals, all the nice words,
Mm.
and really examine the functional, structural reality for the artists who rely on it.
And we should be clear, we're not here to assign blame or, focus on individual frustrations. We're focusing squarely on how systems behave when these good intentions meet the realities of bureaucratic management, of committees, of finite resources.
And that leads us to the really uncomfortable central question that the sources kept bringing up. If the Dutch art system is so exceptionally supportive and so carefully designed, why do so many artists who work within it remain in this state of, well, structural precarity?
Well, if we start at the fundamental design level, the answer, surprisingly, is efficiency. The core design choice of this system is that it prioritizes manageability. And in practical terms for an artist, that means prioritizing manageability over artistic unpredictability.
That is such a key distinction because art, by its nature, it should be unpredictable, right? It should involve friction and risk. So if manageability is the foundational goal, then the system is going to favor very specific outcomes.
Outcomes that are administratively clean.
Mm.
Precisely. We see this clear operational preference for coherence over friction, for legibility over complexity, and this is maybe the most powerful one, a structural preference for continuity over rupture.
Continuity over rupture. Can we slow down on that one for a second? I mean, for the listener trying to picture this, what does continuity look like in a grant application that rupture doesn't?
Continuity is the long-term applicant.
Hmm.
Their work shows a clear, traceable evolution within an established medium or, a thematic scope. They had a predictable history.
Okay.
Rupture, on the other hand, that's the artist who spends 3 years doing intricate ceramics, then switches radically to experimental digital film, and then pivots again to community-based performance art.
Ah, right. Because the rupture artist is administratively messy. They don't fit neatly into the box you funded last year, which makes the committee's job much, much harder.
It creates risk. And this preference immediately places this massive administrative and intellectual burden on the artist. The sources are really clear that the artist is constantly required to translate their complex, messy, evolving artistic vision into what's called institutional language.
Wait, I can hear a listener asking right now, why can't they just describe their art clearly? What exactly is this institutional language?
It's not about writing a good description. It's about converting creative output into quantifiable inputs and predictable outputs. It means translating the messy, emotional, subjective reality of creation, the art, into metrics, goals, timelines, and measurable outcomes that fit a grant's KPI structure. It's the language of management.
So the policy ideals might be shouting about pure creativity and unfettered innovation, but the procedure dictates the terms. Public funding, by necessity, dictates the language, and if you can't speak that language, your work, no matter how brilliant, it just becomes structurally invisible.
And that's why the field starts to standardize. If everyone has to translate their vision into the same standardized categories to get funding, the work itself risks adopting a standardized form just to fit the mold. The system starts to reward the art that looks fundable.
And here's where it gets really interesting because we have to talk about risk. Risk aversion is, it's endemic in any system that manages public money. But the sources argue that risk aversion is often disguised in this system as quality control.
Absolutely. The rhetoric of the system, it celebrates innovation and cutting-edge ideas. They have to maintain that progressive reputation. But structurally, what gets rewarded is familiarity. The work that is predictable enough to fit into existing managed categories.
Or that has already demonstrated a track record of institutional success within those parameters.
Exactly.
So if the system's true driver is this risk aversion that creates these distinct patterns of access, this is where that structural filtering mechanism becomes really visible, and it separates two very distinct groups of artists.
That's right. On one hand, you have the artists who move through the system smoothly, almost on rails, probably because their practice just naturally aligns with that demand for coherence and legibility.
Their work is continuous, so their funding stream is continuous.
Exactly. And then you have the other group, the artists who repeatedly have to re-justify their presence, their practice, their relevance with every single application cycle.
And it is so crucial to understand this. This repetition isn't a judgment on their talent or the quality of their art.
No, not at all. It's a structural filter. It's the system requiring constant proof that their work fits the established manageable criteria, even if they have decades of successful practice. They're being forced to prove their legibility again and again.
To move this from the abstract to something, tangible, we can look at a specific case that was documented in the source material. It's the career profile of Roos van der Jagt, who also works under the name Doeleo. She really embodies this complexity.
She has a long, consistent, but multidisciplinary practice. It spans visual arts, photography, film, digital imagery. Her trajectory is a fascinating illustration of how these structural pressures necessitate continuous, often intense adaptation.
You just have to look at her educational history. That's the key to understanding the strategy here.
It is. She established her foundation early, earning her propedeuse in visual arts between 1990 and 1993, so a traditional established art education.
Right. But decades later, the game just fundamentally changed.
It did. And you see this massive recalibration effort. From 2020 to 2021, she completed a micromaster in integrated digital media from NYU. And incredibly, she is currently engaged in master modules in innovation management and business innovation through 2024.
A micromaster decades later. And then innovation management. That's wild. We're talking about an experienced, established artist essentially going back to school just to learn the new grant vocabulary, to learn the technical language of the gatekeepers.
Exactly. And this is the crucial insight. She is strategically acquiring the institutional and technical language required to make her current work legible and fundable. Her practice today involves highly complex areas like AI photography projects, deep dives into authorship with emerging tech.
And you can't explain that work using the language she learned in the 90s. She can't just rely on poetics and visual references. She has to understand and speak to the institutional metrics for innovation, for technology transfer, for digital media integration.
And this highlights the often hidden structural labor required just to maintain a career, let alone advance it. It shows that persistence for the multidisciplinary artist means continuously recalibrating your entire skill set and your lexicon to match the evolving institutional framework.
And this continuous need to recalibrate, to sort of contort your vision and expertise to fit the evolving framework of funding, that's what normalizes structural precarity.
The sources are very clear on this. The system defines specific, harsh structural conditions that artists have to face. These include persistent subsidy dependency, so always chasing the next grant, and the difficult reality that rejection is a structural rather than an exceptional condition.
Think about that for a moment. Rejection isn't just a personal setback. It's a built-in, necessary feature of the system. It's designed to manage limited resources and enforce that filtering mechanism we just talked about. It's structural, not personal. And that is a brutal distinction for an artist to have to internalize.
And when we compare these harsh realities with the stated policy ideals, we find another really significant divergence, specifically around the concept of diversity. Diversity, the sources note, exists very strongly as policy language.
But our analysis shows that this diversity often falters when it has to become a lived reality within the actual operating frameworks of the system. The committees, the entrenched institutional logic, the criteria that inherently reward the known quantity.
Or the artist whose career arc already fits that narrative of continuity, becomes a box to tick, rather than a genuine transformation of the system's core risk tolerance.
So if the established system creates these structural constraints, this dependency, this filtering, how do artists who create complex multidisciplinary work even survive? The sources point to a really powerful strategic response, creating external parallel structures, basically a structural workaround.
And Roos van der Jagt provides a perfect example of this as well. She established Stichting Earth Rising in 2020. This foundation is not just some administrative umbrella. It functions as an artistically driven production and context platform.
And what's significant is its focus. It specifically targets projects that surpass the individual professional practice. Those are exactly the kinds of projects that an individual grant application would struggle to categorize or justify.
It's a genius move. Instead of waiting for the existing structures to adapt to complex, collaborative, or technologically advanced work, the artist builds a parallel institution, one that's designed to create its own internal legibility and momentum. It provides a container for the kind of work the individual-based, risk-averse funding structure prefers to avoid.
It essentially turns the complexity into its own structured, manageable entity. It's the artist beating the system at its own game of institutionalization, but doing it on their own terms.
Ultimately, when you look at the documented trajectory, as it's detailed in the press material for her own project, the artist podcast, The Artistic Career, isn't sustained through certainty or stability, which the system ideally promises. It's sustained through persistence, strategic negotiation, and that continuous, expensive recalibration of vision and institutional language we trace through her education.
And that's the core takeaway here. It's the most important function of this deep dive. We haven't offered any solutions because the power lies in clearly naming the structural logic. We focused on how rules, committees, and frameworks shape artistic access and tolerance for risk. The conclusion is, well, it's inescapable. The Dutch art system's structural logic primarily rewards manageability.
And understanding that structure is absolutely essential for anyone engaging with cultural policy, whether you're an artist, a curator, or a policymaker. Because without naming that structural logic, any attempt at systemic change or any form of resistance, it just remains abstract. You end up fighting symptoms instead of the mechanisms that create them.
So what does this all mean for the future of artistic practice? If the implicit career model requires this constant adaptation, if success means acquiring micromasters in digital media and innovation management just to make your output legible, we have to ask a final provocative question.
If the system rewards artists who successfully build these complex structural workarounds and continuously adapt to this preference for manageability, we have to ask, what happens to the artists and what specific kinds of creative work become structurally invisible because they cannot or simply will not adapt to the system's crushing preference for legibility and continuity? That inability or that refusal to do the extra structural work, that's the final filter.